to be as short as possible because I understand you'll be very tired now. So I will cut short on several things, unfortunately. Just very, very briefly, of course, I thank Professor Longo for inviting me to this interesting workshop and other events linked. My point, my topic is linked to both some theoretical issues that you generally face when you go into this kind of projects, I mean waterfronts, riverfronts, lakefronts and things like that, and some other things that have been researched over time, for a long time, both professionally and in research projects or other workshops that we did, because the waterfront is a quite common thing. Has been on the wake for in the last 15 years has been very, very used. So I have been always puzzled by this dichotomy which is within the general idea of waterfront, because I think this duality, linearity and waterfront on the other side is something that is always present and not often is understood, because there is a more conventional idea that the waterfront it comes from the 19th century city more than the medieval city, because the medieval city didn't really face the water. It was walled, so there wasn't a real waterfront, just in some cases. But the 18th century city is the moment in which the city expands and expands as much as possible and finds in these extensions finds other things like pre-existent villages and geographical things like the sea. So it's very simple. There is something that expands and come across something else which is not regular as it is. So the chessboard of the 19th century city, you know that the 19th century city is made in a regular way, goes to the coast. And then the normal idea of the waterfront, traditional idea, still today very often uses the idea that the waterfront is the city that faces the sea. So the city is stripped naked towards the sea, something like this. We've seen, this is Barcelona, is an obvious example of a very famous 19th century expansions that at a certain moment has been pushed towards the sea. Similarly, nowadays things in most cases haven't changed. I mean, the idea of the big Asian cities being developed often has gone in towards this direction. We might put Hong Kong, Shanghai, which is the one we are seeing at the moment, but similarly Abu Dhabi, which is not in the Far East, but is in the Middle East, and many other examples are just going in that direction. The waterfront is the city that faces the sea, and reversely, you can see the city from the sea in a very pictorial way. That's the way, because views like this have become very, very trendy, very linked to the idea of the city, which is induced by the mass tourism icons. This is Hong Kong, which I've mentioned before, and this is a part of I think Bilbao waterfront, which is quite clear what I was saying, that something goes towards the sea and at a certain point stops. In that moment, what happens? Happens that also you face something which, as I said before, something which is different, is natural, is not artificial as the city, is irregular, and this kind of sometimes even surrealistic meeting of two so different things becomes is what is behind the general idea that we have built upon the idea of waterfront. Waterfront is a beautiful place where these things happen. But as you see in the waterfront, this photo is useful because we can link to some of the topics of the previous project we've seen in the presentation of Professor Ventura, in which there was a port. There was a port that was changed by the designers to something else. And what happens in the waterfront is that you come across the sea, but you also come across other things, which are the ships, fishes, wind, more wind, and infrastructures like the ports. Ports are aligned along the waterfront there and have been often considered like something alien. And my idea is that instead we should understand that the port is like a prosthesis to the city, which is something that should be absorbed by the city. Apart from particular cases in which the port is really making a barrier, but most often we have to understand that we can, in a way, integrate these things, like we integrate glasses in our body, or watches at a certain point, and now cell phones. There are artificial objects that are introjected into something which is considered natural as the cost. And we don't have to have prejudices in that. The coast is a place where other things happen to be. Can be natural, can be artificial, but having the idea that the waterfront is the place where the nature comes across the city and must be stick to this idea of nature is an idea that really brings us nowhere. That's my point. And again, this is Bari, which is quite clear, very, very strong 19th century structure, and the waterfront is like a result. And most often in these cases, the idea was that of making the cost regular, in order to adapt the cost to the chessboard, to the grid of the city, not really to leave the cost as it is. That's something that has happened often, which is a normal procedure that has been done several times. For example, you probably know that Manhattan wasn't as flat as it is today. Manhattan was a place in which there were different levels, and when they made a plan, they wanted to level out, because the idea was that not only that the grid was regular, all the blocks similar, but also flat. And so they made a lot of work to make everything flat, because there was an idea that the city was artificial and regular, and the more artificial, the better, which is not really the case. I think we can have a different way of approaching. We have done these things several times. Again, a typical example of this idea of waterfront is the Palazzata di Messina in Sicily. This is a picture before the earthquake of 1906. And this is a plan after, by Giuseppe Savona, which basically it's like a modern version of the old idea of having this fantastic view over the sea, and basically the blocks, which are generally one close to the other, one after the other, become suddenly visible, and therefore theatrical, beautiful, and this idea of waterfront as a spectacular place, which I think is limiting. Often the city has been projected into the sea, following again this idea. This is the famous Yokohama terminal for foreign office architects in Japan, which is quite clearly, despite the fact that the building itself is very complicated and very, in a way, mimetic of natural condition, but the idea is that there is an urban axis that projects on the sea, which is a more radical idea, which was quite common in the early 20th century intervention. Like, for example, here is the Stabilimento in Mondello, a beach close to Palermo, which was built at the beginning of the 19th century, exactly with this idea that Alessandro Zerapola and Farsimo Sadiev used in Yokohama. And these are the piers that we're not very accustomed to, but are very popular in England coast and California coast, as much as the New England coast. And they are generally very long projecting things into the sea, in which quite clearly the idea is of having a piece of the city in the sea. Like something like this is in one of the projects we've seen this day, the botanical garden plays at the end of one of these promenade that comes from the city and goes into the sea. But things that not always go in that way. For example, that this is a place in New Jersey in which they're not exactly houses, but barracks and roulottes and things like that. But they are all linked to the street in the middle. You see the street in the center, and the waterfront is left like a rear side. So there isn't absolutely the idea of having this continuous facade. The waterfront, this connection of the sea to the city to the sea is, as I said, perpendicular. The idea is that the city goes to the sea and there is a perpendicular relation, but also there is also a direction for that. The direction is generally, the main direction is the direction according to which is the city that goes to the sea and not the other way around. But at the same time, I think that there is another possibility of seeing the things, which is the idea of linearity, because things along the coast are often linked along the coast in a parallel relation, which is really the opposite of the idea of a perpendicular relation to the coast, which is something that happens even in nature. For example, here in Greece, we can see that the coast itself, without any human intervention, is quite clearly things along the coast are linked together with a parallel relation. So the coastline becomes the main ocean as against the waterfront of what we've been talking about so far. That's again Mondello Beach, close to Palermo, in which this is a garden city that was planned at the beginning of 20th century. And quite clearly there is again a natural element, which is the beach. It's 1.5 kilometers beach that links with other part of the coast. That makes the coastline really prevailing over any idea of having things that comes by the city towards the coast, in a way regardless of the parallel relation. And this is most often seeable in Portolani. Portolani are those books that were used, I don't know if they use those nowadays, but they were used up to 20, 30 years ago. To go to the ports, you arriving with the boat, you could read these books, and there were drawings in which you can see how the coast will appear to you, arriving with a sailing boat or something. And in this Portolani, it's quite clear that all this relation along the coast is made really visible. The relationships that exist between all different things that are aligned along the coast, with no or very, very little relation to what is behind them, which is the city, of course. And linearity is something that in architecture is quite important. This is a road in the desert of Utah in the United States, but we might mention, for example, all the debate about the lineamenta that was made not only by Ghiberti in the 15th century, Ghiberti the sculptor, but most remarkably by Don Battista Alberti, that made Lineamenta, as you know, is the title of the first book of his treatise on architecture. For him, lineamenta is a very important thing in architecture, although it's, and he talks a lot about lines. And it's important to realize that the line, which is something that, with which we deal every day, as we draw, what we draw as architects is the 99% lines. Is something that doesn't belong to our culture. Lines is something that arrived within architectural design, coming from geometry, and coming from painting. So it's a very peculiar notion, but for us it's everyday matter. So it's something that we have to deal. And line, but the line is also a way of, regardless of the representation, regardless of Alberti's acknowledgement of the line as a foundative part of architecture, the line is something, is a way of putting things together, things which is part of our business as architect every day, putting things together. How things can be joined together, can be joined in a plan, but things can be in a row, can be in a line. And the road is like the coast, is a typical case of things, architectural objects that are in a relationship one to the other along something which is a line, which is something that we have to be aware of. And lines exist also as repeated things, like in agriculture. There is a vineyard in Sicily where the line is the main object, the main element of the landscape. But also in other kinds of agricultural fields like these in the United States, the lines are existing. Lines can become stripes, which is slightly different things, and you know the stripes have become very much used, especially I'm sure you know about these things, but especially in the last 20 years, Ren Koolhaas as the one that more than anyone else has dwelled upon this idea of stripes as a way of organizing everything, but mainly the landscape. His project for La Villette, or the projects in Canada, are a way of trying to organize things in the territory along stripes. So in a linear way of thinking. And this is you probably know the famous examples of the opus plan by Le Corbusier for Algeri, which I think I will not show. Well, this one is Edward Chambers, someone who before Le Corbusier made a linear city, which were like a big infrastructure, the train going in and houses on top of that. So it was the idea of joining together these archetypes, the infrastructure, road, railway, together with the wall, the idea of wall, which is another linear element, and all these things together becomes almost automatically architecture, like in very famous linear buildings like the Unité d'Habitation of Le Corbusier, in which the length is much bigger than the width. And the linearity becomes very important for people in the 30s. There were the so-called disurbanists, like Mosei Ginsburg, Mikhail Okoitovich. These guys dreamed of the idea of a city that was made along lines. So these lines you see are a row of houses and buildings all scattered in the big landscape. They were really against the idea of city as a way of putting things together like as groups, as clusters, but having things all in a row. It's a very simple idea, but sometimes we forget that. And this is a famous project by Ginsburg in which the buildings themselves becomes linear buildings. And this is where, at that time, is the period in which Le Corbusier was going on with his opus plan, and then later he went on that in the sketches from Montevideo, Rio de Janeiro, and so on. So it's a moment in which there was a clear idea that a linearity could be a way of developing cities, houses, buildings, and so on and so forth. Linear things are in the human settlements. For example, here in Palermo, this is a project I did as a professional project in which it was an hotel, and I found myself facing It's a big area in which there was this borgata, which is like a nebra along the street, typical Sicilian nebra that develops along the street, very linear, naturally linear. And our idea was that of having the buildings around this line. So we found nothing else than a line that could make some kind of order in this very big area. Again, this is a drawing of that project. And this is a competition we won with the school group of the School of Architecture in Palermo for the circular highway in Palermo, which is, of course, is a big linear infrastructure around the city of Palermo. And so a lot of the things were facing this idea. There was a conflict at that time between the architects in the comune and some part of the group, because there were people that always thought of a notion which is true, I agree with, but it's limiting. The idea that always happens, that when you have an infrastructure, you are interrupting some other pre-existent connections. This is quite common. But this, in my view, can't become the only idea. I mean, of course, if you can tie this connection, is good, but this is not the 100% of the project. The infrastructure itself has a strong unity as a line, that this can be used to develop things. So we went on making things like these big buildings in black, you can see, which are linear buildings that try to exploit something that is already there. I mean, I don't think we can fight against the linearity of a big road. There is something good in that. We have to manage to deal with that. This is a big building, very, very, very long building, which was made, after all, is not our idea. If you look at the Ilia, the big building by Rafael Moneo and Manuel Solá Morales in Barcelona, so-called the horizontal skyscraper, is grounded on this idea that along the diagonal you make a big building which is enforcing and using a power which is already there, instead of having single towers. I mean, if you know Barcelona, just across the road you see there are towers that try to establish a vertical point relation which is absolutely absent from the diagonal. And they don't manage really to establish any sort of relationship with the road, while the Ilia does very, very successfully. And this is our building along the highway in Palermo, again, this plan. As you can see, we weren't really making a wall, because there is a way of making the pre-existing connection, which were cut by the highway, in a way acknowledged, and we try to tie them. Nevertheless, we wanted to enforce the linearity of the infrastructure. Again, you can see that there is actually a big bridge crossing the highway, so somehow I think we managed to find a balanced position between these two contrasting ideas. And now I go very, very fast. That's the Barcelona waterfront, which probably you know. That's the building by Alvaro Siza, which is like a round tower. These are buildings that, in my view, are buildings that really, of course, are regardless of any possible formal connection to the city behind them, and try to be like objects that are aligned along the coast. And the coast becomes, the coast becomes a promenade. That's a tower of Gonzalo Pirna in Lisbon, but at this Barcelona. So if we go back to Siza Tower, is at the end of this long coast. What you see on the foreground is Barceloneta, and with this fantastic building, which I mean is a awful building. Formally, it's a very ugly building, but in terms of position in relation to the city, it's a fantastic building because it's just when the coast turns around. And it's quite clear that there is a strong line along the coast that goes all the way up to the Porto Olimpico, which you can see where the two big towers are, and farther away. And after the Porto Olimpico, we see the Sizza building, which is a meteorological tower. I mean, and in my view, the idea is that what they managed to do with a lot of different people working on, so in different times. But there was an underlying idea that things were aligned and they were like objects, in a way like ships. Because one of the conditions of the coast is that it's a place of randomness, it's a place where things arrive in a way, in some kind of irrational way, like the idea of shipwreck. You arrive on the coast, and you find, if you go along a beach, you find all these pieces that arrive from the sea, and they are scattered there in disorder. But this is part of the idea of the coast. So having different things that can be linked together along the coast, which in Barcelona becomes a big promenade. There's the Mont de la Fusta, which is a part of this thing, but we go very, very fastly along the slides. Here we can see there are kiosks, there are canopies. You can see on the right the tower. That one is a sculpture by Rebecca Orr. There are a lot of small and different objects that I think very strongly encapsulate the idea that the coast is a place where things arrive, as you do when you want to, with a boat, you go into a port or you go to the coast. You don't really know exactly where you're going to place your boat. You adjust. At a certain point, you find a configuration which is very random, and that's the promenade you can see. And I think the big fish by Frank Gehry, it's thought also with this underlying idea. It's nothing to do with the idea of waterfront. Again, we can see other things. This is another place where these things happen in a more confusing way, and that's Venice Beach in California, which the small houses arrive and there is a promenade, and then there are palm trees and the kiosk and other things. So it's like the waterfront fails to happen. It was supposed to happen along the promenade, and then other things are grouped beyond that point. There is no sea immediately after the promenade. So other things over time have been grouped over there. And so the waterfront had to give its way, was really overtaken by the coastline. And a similar, but not exactly the same, happens in some places like, I think this is Trouville or Deauville in Normandy. But there's no time to go on all these things. As Mondello, that's very easy when there is a beach, because there is a connective things, a material things that connects things together along the coast. That's Botafogo in Rio de Janeiro, which quite clearly brings about the idea of coastline. And these are the beaches in Rio de Janeiro, Ipanema, Botafogo and Copacabana, which are so strongly prevailing over the city. And that's a picture to show what I was meaning when I say randomness. On the coast, what happens is something that is in this picture by Alex McLean. Boats grouped along a dockyard. It's a place of randomness, which is a randomness which is not arbitrary. Every single boat had a way of getting to its place, and this happens along the coast. These are some pictures by Finnish photographer Ian Erola that has been dealing with these things. There are buildings that have really express this idea of shipwreck, like the Cursal by Moneo in San Sebastian, which is very, very clearly thought of as a fragment, something that, like a piece of rock or a piece of something arriving from the sea and landing on top of the coast. Again, Barcelona, there is no time to go on that, but there are also buildings like this is a Casa Nave in Palermo, in one of the Borgata of Palermo, that were fought with this idea that the coast is a place where ships and buildings becomes equal in a way, which is what happens in ports. In ports you find sometimes, I don't know if you are experiencing that, but in Palermo it's quite common that you are walking in the city and you see buildings, at the central point you see a ship. In Venice happens often. You see these big ships, which are like the facade of the ship, which is surrealistic, breaks into the city, and is part of the urban landscape. So they are performing exactly like buildings. That was a Casa Nave, a building that was fought as to have the two ideas joined together. That's an old building, of course. And along the coast, of course, historically, you can find things that are not at all linked to the waterfront and perpendicular idea, like, for example, this is just an example, Tenby, a small city in England, where it's quite clear all the things that are along the coast, the boats, the dockyard, the wall, and the buildings are all aligned and grouped together along the coastline. Metropolis by Renzo Piano, again, is a nemesis of the shipwreck idea. And these are photos in various ports in which it's quite clear what I mean when I say that it's a place where ships and buildings becomes equal. You can go rather quickly. Quanto tempo c'ho? Posso parlarti 10 minuti? Sì, ce la fate? And that's Mondello. Mondello was the place for a big competition that we organized with the university, and we made a plan. We prepared all the material for the competition. So we made like a pre-project, avant-project for the competition, in which, of course, we add things done very strongly with this idea that everything has to be thought of as part of a coastal system rather than any sort of projecting thing. So we really went against the idea that was present in Mondello, where the stabilimento, which I've seen before, the building on the sea, was fought. And that's another competition we made along the coast in Palermo, called the Palermo Progetto Palermo. These are swimming pools, and again we tried not to relate to things behind us, but there is no time really to go over all of these things. That's again another workshop I made in Marsala, in which the linearity of the buildings became a substantial part of the project, and we were along the coast. That's again Marsala, and I just stop on that. That's much better than my projects. Is Manuel Sola Morales in Porto, the waterfront of Porto, which I think is a masterful example of how these ideas can be co-present in a conflict, of course. But architecture is made of complex situations. So oversimplify with either coastline idea or a waterfront idea is, to me, a mistake. And in this project, it's quite clear that Manuel Sola Morales manages to have the two polarities joined together. This is part of the realizing project. And I think all the things I've said so far don't need to be overstressed again. They are quite manifest in the photos. This is part of the buildings and the infrastructural things and gardens and whatever else is there. You probably know already this project. I stop here. I think it's better. Okay, thank you very much.
Ringrazio gli studenti per la pazienza, però non volevo sottrarre questa possibilità. Sapevo che era un intervento comunque agile e che il suo inglese è anche molto chiaro, per cui sapevo che no, non penso che ci siano stati problemi di comprensione dell'inglese, altrimenti non l'avrei proposto.
Lei non l'avrebbero capito.
Però gli italiani lo capiscono. Ci sono domande? Chi è interessato poi a seguire i lavori della giuria ci trova